Pinkerton's Ghosts is a horror anthology podcast by Superversive Radio, with no affiliation with any detective agency, person, real or imagined, or the dark forces of Outre-Terre. It is not intended for children. Hey, Control. I got myself back under, control. I don't have much time before I have to take off, so I'll try to be quick. There I am, standing in the midst of a bunch of bog-bound and tuxedo-wearing necromancers, and they're all applauding me. They all know who I am. They know I killed Hawkwood, and I honestly can't tell if they're okay with me killing him or what's going on. My escort, Lana, was Hawkwood's kid, and she seemed to be at least as ruthless as her dad. I stood in the Griffith Observatory, wishing I had my soul stone, or a smoke grenade made from the ashes of Pompeii, which is a new gadget I've been working on. I think I can kind of combine smoke with temporal mechanics to make a person functionally invisible. You know what? Doesn't matter. Not the time or place. 100 vanilla mortals, many of whom had to be some sort of necromancer or otherwise evil wizard, all laughed and applauded me. It was like I was a child who had done something funny or skillful, and they wanted to encourage me. I couldn't properly see the faces of most of the crowd. One was not clapping. It was the stuffy British guy from the La Brea tar pit case a few months back. I wondered what would become of him. He was trying to avoid my gaze by staring intently at his cup full of punch. At least, I hope the red stuff in the cup was punch. Never know with necromancers. The other face I recognized was the tour guide I had saved off the Oregon coast. Control, I can't for the life of me remember her name. I know she said it, but I've totally forgotten what her name was, so I guess I'll just call her Jane. Anyway, Jane was there near the door we had just come in, and she was beaming. She was smiling so broadly I was worried her teeth would fall out. She was clapping the loudest of anyone there. When everyone else had faded away, she rushed up to me and threw her arms around my neck as though we were old friends. I guess women have an easier time hugging people who are mostly strangers. I don't, so I stood rigidly and hoped for the moment to pass. In my family, if you hugged another person, you were either related or engaged. And in the Florida side of the family, both. And to the best of my knowledge, I was neither to Jane. Still, I muscled past my discomfort and gritted out a, "Hi there!" She pulled away from me, still with an eager smile on her face. "Jim," she said, "it's so good to see you. When Lana told me to come be at your award presentation, I just had to drop everything and come down to L.A. Nope, that didn't track. What did track was that here's a woman I had once saved, and my invitation to this event had said there would be some sort of sacrifice. I reached into my coat pocket to find my holstered pistol and drew it in one smooth motion. Hours of practicing in front of the mirror had paid off. I spun around to Lana, who was behind me, and interposed my body between Lana and Jane. I hadn't even lined up the sights on Lana's body when my arm stopped moving. Lana, with a cool smile, held up her hand. Between two fingers, I saw a fallen hair from my head. I didn't realize Lana had picked any sort of hair off me. Had she done this while time was frozen in her car? What was going on? She obviously used the hair to create a sort of sympathetic link to my body and somehow froze me in place. Apparently that didn't trigger heavenly retribution for using magic to harm another person. She blew the hair away, and it burned, turning into a floating wisp of ash. "No need to be rude, Jim," Lana mock-scolded me. "Jane here is so utterly enamored with you after you saved her life last year. It only made sense that we extend her an invitation to be the guest of honor at this little ceremony. Jane, dear, would you please take Mr. Donovan's gun? I'm worried he doesn't know how dangerous it is." Jane came around from behind me and gently unwrapped my fingers from my Colt 1911. My body wasn't locked in a rictus. I was just unable to issue commands to my muscles. I couldn't speak, but I could breathe. I made a hissing sound. Always show monsters like this defiance. "Jim," Jane said sweetly, "you shouldn't have these things. They're dangerous. You could hurt someone. Or yourself." She pinched my cheek. In any other context, it would have felt endearing, if a little strange since I barely knew her. The flesh of the cheek stayed in its form, falling back in slow motion. I may not have been able to twitch my pointer finger enough to end Lana, but I could still adjust my facial muscles enough to raise an eyebrow. Lana noticed, came over, and put her arm around Jane's waist in a reassuring way. You see, Jim, when we asked Jane if she'd come speak at the event, she said she'd be terrified to stand in front of so many people and talk about what you did for her. So we offered to help her not feel any fear at all. She turned to look at Jane and said, Isn't it nice to not feel at all afraid about the speech you have to give? Jane sighed, relieved, and said, It is the biggest weight off my shoulders to know you can help me when the time is right. Right then, the musicians stopped playing their waltz and began playing For He's a Jolly Good Fellow. Oh my, Lana said. And speaking of, I didn't realize we're so close to midnight. Jane, dear, I think it's time. Why don't you go see Mr. Rudolph to get set up? Jane leaned in and gave me a little kiss on the cheek, giggled as she did it. She gave the colt to Lana and skipped out of my line of sight. Yes, Lana said. No fear at all. I glared at her. Oh, don't look at me like that. The poor girl is utterly smitten with you. If it wasn't us to take advantage of it, it'd be the Fae, or the demons, or any number of others you might be annoying at any given moment. I managed to eke out a growl. You know, I've got to hand it to you, James, Lana said, as she turned her body around so that I was able to look in the direction of a preset stage that had been erected at the end of the dining hall. She really is a lovely girl. She's smart, funny, and most importantly for us, innocent. That's such a rare quality to find these days. I tried to speak. All I managed was some slight moans. Lana pulled out a little quartz crystal and said, Try to focus your words into thoughts. I'll be able to hear you if you direct it towards me. She passed the crystal over my forehead and throat. My voice came from the crystal, which vibrated in her fingers. You've got the wrong idea. I barely know her. I met her once, and I haven't seen her since. She means nothing to me. Lana laughed. Oh, James, your feelings don't matter at all in this case, but valiant try. What is it you colonials say? A for effort? I tried to yell more thoughts at her, plead with her to kill me and spare the girl. But Lana snapped her fingers, like a hypnotist breaking the spell. The crystal stopped working. I might as well have been shouting at a rock, which I guess I technically was. As we watched, Jane was helped onto the stage by the same tuxedoed man that had announced Lana and me when we had entered. Jane was in a simple white peasant dress. It was totally out of place in this dinner, crowded full of men and women in decadent, formal attire. She was handed a microphone, and everyone began wildly applauding, even more than when I showed up. She blushed. Did prey blush at the attention of a wolf pack? I was grinding my teeth to bits. I couldn't stand to see what was about to happen, but I couldn't turn away. I couldn't stop anything. The only thing left to me was the Verum Vicio. It was time to risk heaven's wrath. I opened my eyes and lost focus to see if there was anything else that I could manipulate or take advantage of. I opened my eyes and lost focus so that I could see if there was anything here I could manipulate or take advantage of. Jane began speaking, confidently, passionately. She talked about her life in Oregon, her family, all that. I didn't pay attention. I was focusing on each and every strand of stray energy and magic that I could find within my narrow scope of vision. It wasn't enough to simply see what was present. I had to adjust how deeply into the Verum I would look at each section of the concert hall. I found a natural gas pipe that led into the kitchen, between the double doors and the chandelier controls. Even better, the pipe had a small, almost imperceptible leak, possibly caused by a recent earthquake. Perfect. A couple of days ago, in a state of sure exhaustion, when I had been pushed to the limits, I used the Soul Stone to affect gravity and cast out balls of fire. Today, however, I didn't have the channeling focus. I didn't have the emotional terror of seeing an eldritch horror in the shape of a floating, disemboweled woman. I wasn't tormented by Loki, the demonic sewer of chaos and malice against the human race. I guess I haven't finished that report yet, Control. I'll get on that as soon as possible. I didn't need to create fire out of thin air. Just a tiny spark. Infinitesimal, really. The spark, combined with the oxygen and natural gas, would easily provide enough of a distraction to shake this whole place up. My body was still rigid. I blocked out everything I could hear around me. I stopped listening to Jane's speech. I was so deep into the Visio, I couldn't even hear her. Deeper, deeper into the molecular level. I had to accelerate oxygen molecules enough to force combustion. I found the strings that bound two oxygen molecules together and grabbed them with my mind. I wiggled them back and forth, like a child wiggles a clothing line in his own backyard on a summer day. And then I heard something that snapped me right out of the focus. And that's why I absolutely love Jim Donavan. What? Why did she say that? I pulled out of the Verimvisio so fast I got psychic whiplash. My stomach wanted to vomit. Back in my body, I looked over at Jane, beaming right at me. Lana stood beside me, looking into my eyes. When I came to normal space, Lana looked off to the stage and nodded at the announcer. Faster than I could register, I watched him slip a knife right into Jane's heart and pull it out in one swift, practiced motion. I don't think he even scraped her ribs. She had time to eke out, "Jim," before she fell. Well, no. She stood for a moment. Her whole body shivered and blood. I can't describe it. I can't. No! That's better. I was still frozen. I couldn't help her. The random girl who said, under magical compulsion, that she loved me. Who knows if it was even real? And frankly, who cares? I raged inside my trapped body. I think I burst a blood vessel in my eye, because suddenly the vision in my right eye turned red. I snapped back into the Visio. I found those same two molecules. I won't even bother explaining how I knew it was them, beyond they had my fingerprints still on them. And rather than just tugging on the strings that bound them together, I smashed them together like coconuts. I beat them like a 5-year-old bangs pans. The resulting explosion engulfed the entire string quartet. In an instant, they went from waiting for their cue to play to being totally disintegrated in a fireball that was so hot, it went beyond red and orange. It was pure white. The resulting debris tore through some dancers that had stood near the quartet to watch. Jane's speech. I saw a flaming violin bow spear through a man's chest. About this time, the chandeliers that were suspended began crashing down, one by one, as the wizards who held them in place became distracted. Several acolytes, who had been positioned so that their unworthy heads would catch any falling wax, were crushed under the weight of falling chandeliers. They didn't even move out of the way. I assumed they were under some magical compulsion to stay in place until ordered otherwise. Maybe they were just okay with it. Any chance to escape. About this time, with the chaos surrounding me, and the violence and body count mounting, I watched as a piece of falling ceiling clipped Lana Hawkwood in the head and knocked her down. Immediately, all sensation returned to me, and I was in full control of my faculties. I rushed to the stage, gathered up Jane's slumped-over body. I couldn't see the announcer anywhere, for whatever reason. He must have left the stage while I was distracted with unleashing all hell on the Griffith Observatory. He probably knew what would come if I found him. I looked down at Jane's body and brushed a lock of hair from her rapidly cooling face. I couldn't feel her breathing, and the blood was now simply trickling out of her body rather than being pumped out. Still, I wouldn't leave her for them. I still didn't know what they were trying to sacrifice her to, and I didn't want to know. The stage under Jane's body was glass. I wiped some blood away to see a clay model of a man. The blood was pooling on pre-made holes in the body. Some piece of metal had struck through and pierced its head. I couldn't tell who it was. I didn't want to. I checked Jane again. Still gone. I looked up from her body at the chaos I had created. Flaming debris was falling everywhere. At this point, all the chandeliers had crashed down onto their unsuspecting acolytes. Water sprinklers were going off in a futile attempt to quench the fire, but it burned hot and was spreading faster than the water could extinguish it. Bodies were piled everywhere. I was pretty sure this would violate the whole don't use magic against humans thing, but I don't know. They killed an innocent, if stupid, girl to get back at me. They needed to die. I carried her body outside. The fire exits were largely unblocked, and no one hindered our egress. There were people jumping into vehicles and screaming away. I could hear choppers in the distance. I'm pretty sure it was the LAPD coming to figure out what had happened. There was also the faint siren of a fire truck far away. If heaven didn't seek retribution for what I had done, I was pretty sure the mayor of LA would find a way to make me pay. I'm not sure if he's with the Autre Terre, but what am I talking about? He's a California politician. It's all but guaranteed. I walked about 50 yards past the burning building and set Jane down on the grass. I reached into my pocket for my cell phone. I needed to call my contacts at the Vatican, see if I could get some warrior monks or maybe a legal team to help me out. I was sure they'd be interested in a cult full of necromancers, or that used to be full of necromancers. And then I heard a pistol's hammer being pulled back. "Put the phone down, Mr. Donavan," Lana said, with a quiet fury. I complied, slowly, setting it on the ground and raising my hands. She walked around from behind me and stood directly in front. Her forehead was bleeding. She had my Colt 1911 in her hands, as pointing it straight at my heart. In a way, I was glad to see it. I was glad it hadn't been left inside the towering inferno that used to be Griffith Observatory. "What was this all about, Lana? Why me? Why her? What is this?" I asked. I was tired and sad. If I was going to die, I at least wanted to know why I was going to die. "Why? Because the time was auspicious to bring Father back. Sacrifice the woman you love, and then use her blood to summon a new body from clay for Father. Nothing like killing the man who killed you for a welcome home present. How could I resist? Woman I love, I don't even know her. I can't even remember her name. I met her once. She's got some schoolgirl infatuation with me because I saved her. That's not love." Lana's face fell. She let the gun droop just a hair. "Well, I suppose the planned sacrifice was a failure. But that doesn't mean the night has to be a total loss." She raised the gun right back and pointed it at me. I heard a crack, but not the crack of a gun discharge. Lana dropped like a sack of potatoes, and a rather large rock rolled away from her fallen body. I looked up and saw the necromancer from the La Brea tar pits. He was in some weird follow-through, as though he was a drunk Major League pitcher. "Yes!" he shouted. "Bold Abima!" Thanks," I said, followed immediately by, "Why? And what is your name?" "John, or at least that's all you're getting from me. As for her, well, I hate her more than I hate you, Yank," he said. "Simple as. This cult's been hounding me ever since that kerfuffle at La Brea, which, admittedly, was thanks to you, but, well, that was just the start of my trouble with you. They've been a bee in my bonnet for decades. So, as thanks for killing most of them, I give you your life, and that of young Miss Hawkwood. Might I suggest ending this now?" He gestured to where my Colt was resting, a few feet from her body. I walked over to it and picked it up. I leveled it at Lana, and activated the safety, and slipped it back in my holster. I walked back to pick up Jane, but looked over my shoulder at John. "Thanks," I said, "but I'm a detective, not a murderer." "She'll be back, you know," John said. "Never leave an enemy alive." "I left you alive last time," I said. "Seems like it worked out pretty well for me." "You didn't leave me, I escaped." Semantics. I left him standing over Lana's unconscious body. I walked off and escaped the coming police and fire by slipping into Griffith Park. I didn't dare go into the Visio. The attention of things better left unseen was palpable. I called Father Smith when I felt like I had safely escaped. I waited with Jane's body for Vatican battle friars to find me. A black Chevy Suburban pulled up, and 4 men in tactical gear, wearing rosaries, stepped out. They took her body and immediately began performing last rites over it. I have no idea if she was Catholic, I'm really not sure if performing a ceremony over the dead will do anything, but I can't imagine it harmed her. Maybe it'll keep other things off of her. Father Smith had come along with the friars. He stepped out from the back of the Suburban. I told him what happened. I left nothing out, including the history I had with Jane. After I finished the story and stopped talking, I felt massively exhausted. I started swaying a bit on my feet. The priest led me to a bench and sat with me. "Jim," he said, "you did a terrible thing in order to save an innocent." "Yeah, I know." "You didn't have to tell me all this." "Yeah, I didn't. Someone had to know." "It is more than that, Jim," he said, and put a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "You are seeking absolution, I think." "Not Catholic, Padre." "Immaterial. You seek to both redeem yourself for your actions, but also to be forgiven, no? That is what I do. It is in my judgment that you acted wisely and correctly. Though perhaps you should have called us first as backup before you walked into the lion's den. Daniel, you are not." "Would you have come?" I asked. "Well," he chuckled, "not myself, but I would have sent some of them. But suffice to say, te absolvo, Jim Donavan. You are absolved. But for your penance, I think I would like to see you visit a monastery for a bit, just to experience peace in a setting you're not accustomed to. Plus, this will give the brothers a chance to hunt down the rest of the cult, and perhaps bring the Lorna Hawkwood to some sort of justice. It is always nice to have a lead fall into our laps." "Yeah," I said. "I can do that." "Good. Well, we'll give you and the young lady a ride then. We'll take you to your office or home, let you gather what you think you might need, and then whisk you away for a week or so." And so I had them take me to my office. I asked them to wait while I recorded out this and my previous report. They've been very patient, so I should get back to them. I'm going to be incommunicado for a week, Control. I need to figure out what happened. Maybe talk to a couple of monks in the monastery. I'm sure at least one of them can explain why I didn't have an angel smite me after I used magic to kill so many people. And hey, who knows? Maybe I can get some peace finally. Or at least a good night's sleep. This is Jim Donavan. Over and out. Pinkerton's Ghosts is a podcast distributed by Superversive Radio, licensed under an attribution non-commercial, share-alike international license. This episode was written by Ken Dickerson and performed by the same. Ben Wheeler edits, directs, produces, and herds cats. Ken Dickerson performs our audio editing. Visit us on Facebook, read articles on superversivesf.com, or listen to us on unauthorized Acast, iTunes, or Spotify. Contact us through Twitter at @PinkertonsGhosts, email us at pinkertonsghosts@gmail.com, or send us noble messenger possums with messages strapped to their backs. Don't worry, they know how to find us. Thank you for listening, and good luck.